I was a poetry reader before Dorothy and I got together back in 1992. And, you know, she actually gave me a big tick because, you know, unlike most novelists, I actually had, you know, several poetry shelves. Nothing like what she had. I mean, Dot was the most poetry literate person I know and introduced me to many, many poets. Most of the quotes that are in here, and some of them are not quotes, they're... I mean, I've got Harry saying at one stage, "I'm not the sort of man to kill the thing he loves," which is a paraphrasing of Oscar Wilde's Ballad of Reading Gaol. There's, I have been faithful to thee, sayonara, after my fashion. There is a Dowson's poem. There's a paraphrasing of that. So there's lots of lovely, for readers who are poetry literate, you're going to find lots of embedded words paraphrasing in the novel. And I always think it's wonderful when you actually find those in a novel. It's like you're colluding with the author. I had fun putting them in, and yes, of course, it reveals the author's love of poetry, but it would not have gone in there unless it fit with the coherence and the integrity of the novel, of the fiction. To the final thing, oh yes, and I did quote from Dot in there. I actually have, Jack and Ava walking up to a lecture together, and they did a game that they always like to do, which is to try and outquote each other. And it was a nod to Dot, the fact that I quoted from her, her beloved old friend Bruce Beaver, now dead, and Gwen Howard, who was another friend of hers. That was written in 2005, 2006, and in fact in my manuscript copy, the first one that Dot actually read of this book, she has got her due gratitude for my having quoted her. Lastly, is the novel, like self-portraiture, a form of simultaneous self-conjuring and disguise? In a way, it is. But it's not, you're not hiding the facts of your life, and you're not hiding, you know, your boils and scars. It's not that. It's rather the sorts of things that would interest you, I think, are there in the novel. Having said that, I'm not the first novelist, in fact it's almost a truism now, that novelists do talk about writing truths through their fiction, because, I mean, after all, it's fiction. You can get away with everything and anything because it's all made up. But that doesn't stop the truths from coming through.
Yes, and the strange thing about some of those truths that come through in fiction is they come through sort of in advance, often, of things that come to you in life. Yeah. So it seemed to me, and there's a little note at the end saying that this book was finished before Dot died, which came upon us, as we know, rather quicker than expected. So I mean, it's a kind of, reading this novel, I find interesting that this kind of this question of death and the ethics around death sits so centrally to the novel, and the effect it has on everybody. And yet there it was in your life, but sort of not in any kind of direct relationship.
You know, the interesting thing is, I mean, you're absolutely right about the idea of fiction actually presaging life. And there was a sense, I mean, I do write about a death in this novel and the repercussions that it has on those remaining. So I also write about, it's towards the end, it's all right, so, you know, you don't have to plough through too much of this. Though I hope it's not plough, I don't think it is plough material, actually, but there are certainly some characters that do have, two characters who have a great sense of loss. And the book was accepted by HarperCollins back in November 2007, and at that time Dot was well, and she had been well for a number of years, and we all believed that, I really did believe that she was through it. Anyway, it was picked up by HarperCollins at the, I'm just smiling at my publisher there, at the end of 2007. And it was a wonderful pickup, I have to say. They were so enthusiastic, that I just wanted to throw myself at them. It was really quite pathetic. But that's what you want. You actually want a publisher who clearly loves and gets your book. And Dot and I celebrated quite heartily at that time. Then she became ill 8 months after that. I mean, this book was long. It was long in production, basically, because I changed publishers. So anyway, Dot became ill then, and I decided actually that I wanted to put an end note to this book, basically saying that, giving the timeline, that I would hate to think that anybody thought that this book had been written out of my own personal experience, because both Dot and I believe very, very strongly in the power of fiction to take you into the hearts and minds of people who are not yourself and into places who are not yourself. We like the imaginative part of fiction, and I didn't want to draw on life. So there is an end note to that. But having said this, obviously, I've read the book since it came out. It is amazing how much I got right. And I think it's testimony, in terms of loss, it's testimony to the power of the imagination, that it knows where it's going before you have to go there yourself.
To return to the fiction and the fictional death in this novel, we're going to try and do this without telling you which one it is that dies. But it's Ava who quite early on, voices another of the originating questions in this novel, which is, would you help someone you love to die? And that seems to me such an important question that we're facing in a myriad of ways in this world at the moment. And it's enacted here through one of the characters who gets dementia. And I have to say, it's really scary. I mean, I think you've written about it really well, but it's sort of very scary, and particularly when it comes on with all of them have good minds. It comes on to one of them early, before you expect it. And of course, then we go back to fiction and science. In a way, it's the fiction writer who's able to pose the question, and the obvious person who could answer it is the scientist. But
I think you've picked the crucial thing. I mean, could you help someone to die?
Someone you love to die.
You love, and also, I mean, all of these people, Connie's nearly 60, he's in his late 50s, but the others are in their mid-40s. So it's calling on a side, particularly in your 40s, it's calling on a friendship to do something that friendship could never have imagined. And in fact, for their various reasons, none of the friends can actually assist the one who is failing. So the issue comes up and it's an issue that interests me, I have to say, which is the issue of voluntary euthanasia. Now, I have to say right now, I write fiction. I do not write fiction with a purpose, but the fact of the matter is that all of us of a certain age can't fail. Well, I'm in my late 50s. I have a mother with dementia, severe dementia. and her father died of an unspecified dementia. Mum's is specified also. The fact that, you know, I have a real fear of dementia is, you know, doesn't need much explaining here. So, and there are a lot of people who are in my position who are forced to think about death, and perhaps we'd prefer not to, and how much responsibility people have over their lives, and I mean their whole lives.
Yes, and I mean, it seemed to me it's raised an enormous number of questions, and is it a reasonable question to ask? I mean, is it something that can be asked of love to help someone die? There's that question. To take responsibility for your own death, in the absence of that help from friends, is it a betrayal to then find that somewhere else? Or is it actually honourable to do it? I mean, I think what I loved about this book is that, in a way, these questions are not answered one way, but the kind of the moral terrain opens before us.
Yeah, and
you say, that, you know, we will all in this world, and particularly for a generation like us who've had so much control over so much that we've done, why should we you know, and what's going to happen to us if we do have to relinquish control?
Do you know, it's extraordinary, that question of do you have the right to go against the wishes of those that love you, and if you do need help, and the character in fact in my novel does need some help, do you have the right to go beyond those that love you now? And I have to say, as you're right, I leave it open in the book, and there are, you know, plenty of characters who are a bit peeved off, but from the point of view of me, and I'm happy to say this now, I mean, I happen to be a very strong supporter for me in my life of voluntary euthanasia. It is my right. I have lived and will continue to live responsibly right to the very end, but that's also looking after my end if need be. And the fact that Tony Abbott tells me, I'm going back to those years because that's when the book was written. I mean, I was absolutely appalled that Tony Abbott would tell me how to live my life and my death, in fact, tell me anything. No, of course, I did not vote for him at all. So, I mean, I have some real problems about politicians actually deciding what I think are essentially not political issues. Have I gone into this in the novel? Of course not. I'm telling you as the author here. But I did want to float the sorts of dilemmas that, well, one of my characters actually does have. And it's wonderful to be able to do it in fictional form. You know, these days it's a bit hard to talk about voluntary euthanasia because it's illegal in some forums, but not in fiction.
We're going to have only about 5 minutes before we should open it to questions from you. So I'd like to come back to Jack, which slightly gives the game away that it wasn't Jack who died, because Jack ends up, I think, being one of the most interesting, I think the most interesting character, and he is the one who best deals with all of this, or can understand it in the most complex and holding simultaneous truths and sort of together. So he doesn't have a clear resolution of it, but he can balance it. And I think that, or I should ask you whether that comes back to what shifts in his obsession when the obsession with Ava starts to loosen by being in the same place as her. It's actually, he starts to shift into the kind of creative obsessions, and he makes the link. His originating question seems to me to be something around idealism and illusion, and how obsession and creative obsession can fit on both of those. And of course he was an Islamic scholar. So this is a colossal final question, in 5 minutes, but in a way it sort of draws a lot of these threads back together.
I actually think with Jack, his driving, singular, myopic obsession was Ava. That falls away, and in fact, I think he gets a breadth of vision that the others actually don't have. So he manages to see them all so clearly. Connie, he's 59.
We haven't done Connie.
It doesn't, but I want to bring him in because Connie is one of those charming men. He's gorgeous, he's tall, he's slender, he's got a shock of white hair. He loves women, so he's charming to women. We all know Connie. And many of us have fallen for Connie's charms. If you're lucky, it lasted for an overnight stand, one night stand or a long weekend, and if you're unlucky, you were stuck for a lot longer. Jack sees Connie very, very clearly. Connie has actually got to make some decisions about his life. Jack also manages in the end to see Helen clearly, and Ava and Harry, but I think it is because he's become broader in his creative vision, and he's also been able to actually incorporate his specialty, which is Islam, but do it in a much broader way than he ever used to in the past. One in which actually taps into contemporary happenings. So, in fact, he becomes the biggest figure in the end, the broadest figure.
He becomes the person who changes the most, and in the, as you say, in the most opening way. But the other thing it seems to me he does, which I found really interesting, was this thing of idealism and illusion, that he manages to take his personal experience into it, reinvigorates or revitalizes the way he can speak of Islamic fundamentalism and those young people for whom obsession, idealism, illusion, all kind of fit into this terribly powerful, toxic kind of...
He actually says at one stage that he wondered the extent to which ideals, and he uses the word delusion, actually conflate into each other. Whether it happens to be Helen's ideals about science and her being deluded about what was happening, or indeed, young people who are blowing themselves up for an ideal and perhaps a deluded ideal. So he sees he really does have a breadth of vision. I have to say one thing about Jack. With the readers that have given me feedback so far, people either... he is their favourite character, and the one, yes, he's their favourite character, or there are also those readers that just think, get a life, Jack, get over Ava.
But
very polarised. Yes, he does. Yeah.
Well, I think that might be a good place to open to questions, though I would also say that it's something in what happens to Jack that if we come back to that notion of the mapping of the mind, is that it's sort of through all of these things, but particularly through Jack and what he does with the whole, if we take obsession as a central theme, in some ways more central than the theme of death, that maps a lot of your thinking about a lot of contemporary issues.
Yeah, no, it actually does. Yes.
So, congratulations to Andrea, and questions from you. Now, I'm blind, Andrea's deaf, so you're going to have to make yourselves clear, say it loudly. Here's somebody at the front.
How could Ava stand Harry?
Oh, good question.
Did everybody hear the question?
How nice, a nice loud voice too. How could Ava stand Harry? Ava, in a sense, is the centre of this group. And she is, one of the wonderful things about being fiction writers is that you can give people appearances that you don't have yourself. Ava she's tall and she's full-bodied and she's got this, lots of golden hair and smooth skin, and she's big, you know, she's gorgeous, and she has quite a there's quite an aura about her. She could have had anybody, and instead she marries Harry. And marries young. What he gives her is security and stability. Ava, from the time that she was a 15-year-old, she knew exactly what she needed to move herself on to the next stage of life, and she set about doing it. That doesn't make her cold and calculating, it makes her responsible and sensible. And Harry looked after always. He gave her that firm foundation that she always needed, and she loved him and he loved her, which is one of the reasons why I don't condemn Harry out of hand. I think he loved her well. I think he was a good husband for her. And yes, she could stand him, but look, you know, she got a lot of sex from a lot of other people outside of the marriage, and, you know, she travelled in her job and so on, but she always came home. In fact, Harry was home. The question is about how I say I don't want to use fiction to push ideas, but I've made a very personal statement to you, to my close personal friends, between these four walls, and of course the camera at the back, which I had forgotten about. So of course it won't go very far, about my own personal beliefs. I think that fiction that has a purpose becomes didactic. It loses its flair, it loses its attraction, it loses its magic. I think that story actually has, we have an innate attraction to the seductions of story, and I would never want to lose that. That's the first thing. The second thing is you can much more powerfully explore ideas through the point of view of characters, and this is what we've done here. There are, I mean, just taking the issue of voluntary euthanasia, it is never an issue in the novel because I don't want to write about issues. But certainly through the characters, we get an idea of the various attitudes, feelings, fears, longings that people have when it comes to impending mortality and the sort of control you have over it. So I won't be ever writing an essay on voluntary euthanasia. I think that fiction is a much more for me, fiction is a much more powerful way of getting to the guts of some of the important issues that make us human in the new millennium.
I was interested in your comments on the relationship between theoretical science and fiction. As a scientist myself, I'd say all science is starting theoretically with an idea which you can test experimentally. Could you comment on how that applies to fiction?
I think it's so similar. It's all science starts with an idea that is explored theoretically and then it's tried out experimentally. I think that's exactly how fiction works. I mean, think again of the writer on the couch, working so hard. There's a huge amount of work that happens between the ears. In this book, I refer to Nietzsche's maxim that all good ideas come from walking. And there were so many, Lisa Meitner, who was one of my favourite scientists, she worked out that what her longtime collaborator Otto Hahn had just demonstrated experimentally in Berlin, she worked out, as she was trudging through the snow in Sweden, that it was nuclear fission. And these sorts, you know, like scientists, fiction writers also go out for walks, and they come back with the scientist, it'll be something that can be tested experimentally, and with the novelist, it's something to put down on paper. I think the creative imagination works in very similar ways. I love that. The question's to do with a fiction writer's attachment to her characters. What I will say about this book is that I am much kinder to my characters these days, much less judgmental. There's a few people who are nodding who've come the long journey with me, but I am much kinder, and I'm much more willing to allow them their flaws and their frailties. Perhaps I've just become wiser in maturity. Yes, I do have some favourite characters. Philippa Finnemore in my second book always reminded me of a woman that I adored. She was the mother of a boyfriend of mine that I just loved her. So, yes, I loved her. In terms of characters I couldn't abide, never, because I always understood why they acted as they did.
I think that we will have to end. And so I'd like everyone, perhaps we could all join to thank Andrea.